Okay. Well, I gotta mute my.
Okay. I'm just going to introduce that you're here. Welcome, everybody, to the podcast tonight. I have with me tonight Cousin It, that you have all interfaced with on Truth Social. Um, and you're not muted, I'm just telling you.
I'm the snarky one.
Okay, so for those of you who haven't been on Truth Social today, I do want to point out that Cousin It sent me a link this morning that had to do with the Ingersoll Lockwood website. So throughout the day, having put that up, several people have reached out to me. One, I'm not going to mention, that did it confidentially, but others, like Awaken Outlaw, um, had posted that there's controversy with that website. And the controversy is that it may be people that are functioning as controlled opposition. And I had a couple of conversations offline, and let me tell you what I'm talking about. Because in an information warfare, pointing out things like this for all of us to learn from is very, very important. So, we all understand that there's some strings attached to Ingersoll Lockwood's website. For example, that is the author of some books in the very late 1800s, early 1900s that featured Baron Trump as a part of a book. And so there was a lot of immediate, when this website first got discovered, there was a lot of immediate attachment to it from a MAGA standpoint. And there appeared to be people that were managing the website that were not true MAGA people, that maybe in the vein of Q and hiding links embedded in pictures and all kinds of other things, that they were basically trying to co-opt a facet of the anon community. I'll just leave it at that. And in doing so, that what the trouble with that is, well, there's a lot of trouble with it, but so it's possible, for example, I have been very vocal. I have reached out to all kinds of people about Operation Gladio. So, unbeknownst to anyone, today, um, Cousin It found this morning where someone had posted that this obvious Operation Gladio link to a CIA document had been embedded in one of the photos on Ingersoll Lockwood's website. So, if the website has a bad connotation with some, or it's quote unquote conspiracy theory, this CIA report, as far as I can find, is actually out there. There's corroboration that it was released in 2010. It has been used as a source document in at least three of the books that I have sitting on my desk. So the stuff in it is true. But you understand, when you take a truth like Operation Gladio and you attach it to a quote unquote conspiracy theory, you then um, taint the truth also with that conspiracy theory wand. Hopefully, Cousin It, does that make sense? What I just said?
Sorry, guys. I'm still learning how to do this. Yes, it does.
Okay. So she's here tonight because of we're doing something a little different. It's just not gonna be a one-way conversation as far as, the book reviews like I normally do, and so I wanna try to sound out and, have a sounding board for what we're going to discuss, because it's very important that part of our learning, uh, cycle in ferreting out the truth, that we learn from all of the lessons learned as we go along. Hopefully that makes sense. So, having said that, and with that caveat, um, I do wanna talk about this for a second, but let me give you an analogy. My husband, y'all, know him from the Get Smart thing. He has such a, interesting way of looking at stuff, and so we were talking about something completely different, and um if you want to, cousin it, you can mute. I'm just gonna tell this little story, and then we'll get into the more, back and forth, but we were talking about, um chaos and people who gravitate to chaos. Um, and he said, "It's like when you go crabbing." And I just looked at him and I'm like, "How is that? How is anything we're gonna talk about in the next 5 seconds how's that have to do with crabbing?" He goes, "Well, everybody knows that when you go crabbing, you catch 2 crabs because every time one of the crab tries to get out, the second crab pulls them back in. So the more you put in, the more you have pulling the other ones back in so that they never can get out. That's the matrix." So when he said that, we were talking about a friend, but when he said that, I'm like, "Holy crap, I gotta write that down." That's the matrix. So the people behind, the Ingersoll Lockwood website, um, that's what I just described to you. They will, take something that a truth teller is, as soon as it starts getting traction and people start talking about it, and they're going to um, act like a crab, and they're going to grab that. Oh, that crab looks like it's getting out of the bucket. Let's get that crab back in the bucket. And if I can put it in here and then I contain it with this conspiracy, whatever it is their message is, and you see the people that my brother Brian Cates has called out as well. They don't want anybody out of the matrix. And when you begin thinking for yourself and looking at alternative sources of information, if they can grab a hold of your leg and pull you back in the bucket, they're going to do that. And we're all trying to break free from the matrix, and we're trying to go to other sources of information. And that's why I think it's imperative to talk about controversial things. Um, we need to talk about the state of Israel. We need to talk about the Vatican Church. We need to talk about everything as Americans, as fellow patriots. Um, we're not going to say anything um, that is mean spirited. If your feelings gets hurt because you learn a new fact tonight, there's not anything I can do about that. And I'm not, as whatever that famous saying is, that not one of my favorite people, but Ben Shapiro says that facts don't care about your feelings. That literally is life outside the matrix. And we're all living life outside the matrix, no matter how uncomfortable it gets. So that's where we're at. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about this document, because when you go through this document, we are all familiar, having worked through Gladio. We understand that Gladio's origins can be traced as far back as Britain. Um, However, the Churchill finding the use of the tactic of stay behind units in the Boer Wars as a reporter, and having that in his mind, bringing it fast forward into World War II and creating those same stay behind units in Britain, and the go between the Mitfords and Hitler, and the creation in 1942 under General Wolfe's oversight of the werewolf units, another name for Operation Gladio stay behind units, um, and using them and embedding them in all of the Axis territories, Ukraine, Poland, Czechoslovakia, um, Yugoslavia, Italy, um, Spain, although they were not in the war, they did have a fascist dictator, as did Portugal, and those both of those entities created stay behind units. So now we've got these small 20-person units with stashes of weapons, primarily in wooded areas, and they have cash, they have communication equipment, they can be activated, and we're told that they were all implanted in an anti-communist footprint just in case the Russians came or the Soviets came. However, we have refuted that at every step that they were never intended to be anti communist. Just like the left's definition of democracy is not a republic, it's money laundering, drug laundering, weapons trafficking, blah, 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 fascist. The stay behind units translation for anti-communist is fascist. Their job was to instill fascist dictators under the guise of a democracy in order to steer everybody towards their new world order of pan America, pan British Empire, pan Germany, pan Asia, blah, blah, blah. So they're sectioning off the 6 seats at the table for the new world order. And they're going to use stay behind units that they create all over South America, all over the United States, in Canada, in Australia, all over Europe, all over the Middle East, to include Israel, all over Asia. Every country we went in, we put them in. Vietnam, Pakistan, India had them, all of them. So they can, at a moment's notice, create terror. And the terror is used to mold and shape people and steal elections. That's the whole purpose of it. So they're constantly prodding us onto the cattle car of a fascist new world order. And it's all being done in a very covert manner. But as we illustrated last night, they are now doing it in the open. Every single thing about Ukraine, the Azov battalions were all stay behinds originally. The right sector, another facet of the stay behind units. They are being funded out in the open. They are being trained out in the open. They have moved all of the covert Operation Gladio, the money laundering. So we made the argument that the cycle is, in order to fund this entire worldwide terror operation, they had to have black money. So as soon as you have to have black money, the easiest way to get black money is to sell drugs. So in 1968 to 1972, the Corsican mafia, as late back as the 40s, let me just start there. So when we left World War II, you've got the Turkish growers of opium working with the Corsican mafia in France that is turning out number grade for heroin, and they're piping that. They've got a well-established track. A lot of the Nazis transitioned in the 40s, late 40s, from being Nazis to being drug runners and being part of that heroin flow. And y'all read where I posted that in 1972, the CIA took over their drug trade. And they did it in a coordinated effort with President Nixon to arrest, kill, torture um, all of the Corsican mafia that primarily was in France and a few islands off the coast of France and South America, where they put all the Nazis doing their part of the drug trade into America. and basically just eliminated them all, liquidated them. That's what they call it. They liquidated them. And in its place, we had already set up via the Lansky, the Lucky Luciano um, facilities in Sicily to transfer that drug operation. So we go into Korea first and then to Vietnam to create opium fields. And now we're going to take those products, we're going to ship them through Sicily and into Cuba until Cuba gets taken over by Castro and puts an end to the CIA's. Um, and then we take them into South America and basically use the same route that had been using Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile, because what had happened during this time? We went in and prepped the battlefield. We went in and initiated coups in Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, um, Bolivia, Guatemala, and we had prepped the battlefield for transitioning all of the Corsican mafia drug trade into the CIA drug trade. And it was all done to fund Gladio units. So you've got terror, and now you've got a way to pay for it. Well, they generated so much money that they're now in the weapons because, of course, if you're going to have stay behind units and you're going to have terror, you got to have explosives for the bombs that you're going to blow up banks and blow up railroads. And you got to have money for the bombs. You got to have money for the people to pay off. And we already have all the laundromats set up, the Castle Bank in Bahamas, the BCCI in Pakistan when they moved the trade more towards the Afghanistan, when we went in there. So you've got the banking, money laundering. They money laundered through the Vatican Bank. Um, and so you've got the drugs, the weapons, and the money laundering. And on top of all of that, when you go and you start creating terror and you create wars like in Vietnam and in Korea, you displace people. So now you have massive refugees, which is where you get into the human trafficking. So every one of these places, whether it was in Cuba, where people were literally kidnapped off the street and thrown into prostitution, regardless of their age, regardless of their sex, these people are ruthless. And this entire system, network, syndicate was set up, and our government, with the exception of maybe JFK, because you got Nixon in it in the 72. Well, guess when all of this was set up? When Nixon was vice president under Eisenhower. He knew everything about it. It's very likely, and this is completely conjecture, and I will say that up front. It's very likely that some aspect, and I need to take about a week off of doing this, and I will, and come up with a timeline because it is very likely that some part of this got screwed up and Nixon had either gotten cold feet or something along those lines. And that's when they took him out because Ford was 100% all in. He's quoted as saying there's basically nothing off limits for him when it comes to
Excuse me for a second.
Go ahead.
Um, in case people are not aware, Nixon is the only president that ever actually sold his presidential records back to NARA, the Presidential Library. I believe he received $250,000 to give up his presidential records. So I thought that might be an interesting side note
That
as to
is very
why he. So there you go. I don't know if there's any connection there, but yeah, he actually did sell everything back.
huh. Well, that kinda to me lends itself to my supposition because he probably didn't have anything to hide because they took it all, in the lead up to the impeachment where they were taking all the tapes and stuff like that, and a lot of the tapes have been made public. Yeah, that's very interesting. I'll have to let sit on that for, a little bit and find out that's very interesting. So just setting the stage, I want to look at this document that was posted because I think when somebody does do something like that, regardless of what the reason is, that it's actually worth looking at because sometimes the CIA will put something out there that they want you to think is the truth, but it may not be the truth. And so I wanted to look at this in light of all of the stuff that we've researched and these incremental articles, if you will, that are basically like chapters in this. They appear to be written by let me get to this other one. They appear to be written by different people and they basically talk about Alan Dulles and the rat line of getting people, Nazis, not just people, Nazis, the worst of the worst Nazis, out of Germany after World War II. And everything that I have found in here, I find corroborated in the other books. There is some interesting timing, of when, for example, they talk about see, I didn't know that some of the scientists went to, the Soviet Union as well. As a matter of fact, that's how come the Soviet Union was so far ahead of us in the space program, is there were quite a few, not the best, there were quite a few, scientists that went to Russia and the Soviet Union. And that kind of makes sense because you will recall that we've already discovered that between World War I and World War II, Germany made a large investment in the Soviet Union as far as weapons factories that German companies owned. And they used Soviet labor to manufacture and replenish under the nose of the Allies their weaponry, um, and most of the allies, other than Russia, didn't even know what was going on. So there's that. And what I have found is the Soviet Union wanted a lot more of, for example, it says in here a Soviet war crimes trial in 1949 based on these experiments was denounced at the time by the US as simple exercise in propaganda. And yet in 1991, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists revealed that Mengel's equivalent in Japan, Dr. Whoever, as well as his assistants, had been granted immunity by the US in exchange for exclusive access to their researches in chemical and bacterial warfare. And that's despite 3,000 prisoners of war and civilians killed in the course of their treatment as human guinea pigs by the Japanese. And so during the war crime tribunals, Russia in 1949 says this out loud, and they are laughed out of the room by our government as saying they're presenting propaganda. Does that sound familiar? What just happened? The Soviet tells the entire world the United States is developing biological weapons in Ukraine, and our government laughs them out of the room and says that's propaganda. Every single thing that we're going through right now is something that has already occurred, and it's normally occurred multiple times. And that's why we're here. We're here to establish patterns. We're here to establish um, history truthfully so that we can recognize the patterns as they begin to occur again, because there's nothing new under the sun. This is what they do. So I thought that was interesting. Um, also, um, more on the it appears that Klaus Barbie and Estrella did export um, quinine from South America into the United States. They were given US Army contracts during the Vietnam War to make chemical weapons. So these guys are living in South America. There's a German company that they work for, which is basically an affiliate of IG Farben, who made all the chemicals that they killed people with during World War II. These Nazis that were rat-lined out of Germany are down in South America, and they are getting US Army contracts during the Vietnam War for chemicals. You just can't make this shit up. So M Mirex, Merex, was one of the companies, and Gemetex was another one. Two Nazis acted as agents negotiating purchases not only on behalf of the Bolivian, Peruvian governments, but through their friendship with Nazi Hans Rudel, Rudel, sales to Paraguay, Chile through Otto Scorenzi in Spain, and further deals in Madrid. And remember, at the time, Madrid had the fascist dictator Franco in charge of it. Um, Merex, Merex AG, was set up in 1963 as an arms company owned and controlled by Galen, who, remember, he was hired by the new chancellor in Germany to be his chief of intel, and he was Hitler's chief of intel and best friends with Allen Dulles. So they've got German companies in South America making chemicals and selling it to the US Army. So basically, those companies are CIA slash BND, which is Galen's German intel branch of the CIA, because the CIA at this point is paying for all of the German intelligence apparatus to include paying Galen's paycheck. So they're CIA front companies via Germany. So this article goes on and talks about how we covered up all of the Galen cloth Barbie living in um, South America. I was unaware. I thought a lot of them went to Argentina, but there's quite a bit of them in Paraguay. I was not aware of that. I mean, a lot of them. Um,
Yeah, Pope Francis is, can you hear me okay?
Pope who?
Pope Francis is actually a war criminal. He's the only pope that actually has a warrant for his arrest for committing crimes in the 70s out of Argentina.
And I also
So if he was
found
complicit,
out several of those countries down there are primarily Catholic countries, and yet have fascist dictators in charge of them, which I found very interesting. But that kind of goes back to what we talked about before. If you remember in the one book, the author made the comment how if you were going to have a religion affiliated with a fascist government, and these are their words, not mine, that it would be the Catholic Church because it's set up like having the Mafia Don, i.e., the Pope at the top of the pyramid, and then you have the bishops and blah, blah, blah below it. It is the Catholic Church is the one that in accordance with what the author was saying, not my words, that lends itself to that kind of fascist um, working model, if you will, which, you know, I found interesting. So also, they found there's an article in here about them using plastic surgery as a torture mechanism where they disfigured people. Like they took two women and they basically cut one woman's down in Brazil's complete mouth off, pulled all of her teeth out, and sewed her mouth shut as part of the torture. And these were all of these tortures. Surgical tortures were done in countries where the CIA had installed a fascist dictator. Another woman, they had basically cut off her entire nose. Um, Her face was basically allowed almost to be returned to normal. They had an article in here about a plastic surgeon that had went down there to try to help these people, but some of them were beyond help. Um, Another one, um, I'm gonna save this next one because I find this one fascinating. Um, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. I'm gonna save that one for our next one. I only got halfway through that article today. Um, but it is very interesting, and it's most interesting because of who have been inducted into that both religious and military order. And what I didn't know is I'm just going to share this one piece and then we're going to move on. Um, the actual name of it, according to this article, is the Sovereign Military, and I don't know how you say that word, Hospitalier, Hospitalier, Order of Saint John of Jerusalem of Rhodes and of Malta. And of course, we find I wanna go back and do some research on when that name was changed because the normal name used is the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. But that other name's mention of Rhodes, which is Cecil Rhodes, which is the guy that willed the creation of the Round Table and the fascists from the Fabian societies into reality, and provided all of the money and stole the gold and the diamonds from South Africa, has significant meaning as we unfold the origins of Operation Gladio. So I saw that and I'm like, "Oh crap, that's way too much to do for tonight. I'm going to set that aside and we're going to go into that when we reconvene." But for now, I want to I said we were gonna use a couple of these other books that kinda went, situation by situation that, describes actual Gladio operations so you can put them in the context. So, patterns. Let me say this, several of them. I'm gonna be doing another, podcast with, War Hamster on Thursday, and his assignment that I gave him on a Gladio operation, and he gave me one he thought was a Gladio operation that I will either say it is or it isn't. And you'll have to watch on Thursday to find out which one it was. Um, the one that I gave him fits in this paradigm. Y'all remember, and when I was reading this, um, bells and whistles just go off in my head. Okay, so you remember on September 11th, what was going on? There was a training exercise, a nationwide FAA training exercise that was going on the exact same day. And if you remember, it there was the use of that training exercise to either say responses were delayed or responses were messed up, and the whole scrambling of the DC Guard, F-16s. Oh, we didn't know if it was part of the NORAD training exercise or if it was real. Um, Hopefully that rings bells with everybody. Um, what you will find is a lot of the Gladio, especially the bigger ones, the bigger Gladio operations are held in concert with a quote unquote training exercise. And a lot of people's belief is those training exercises are actually to pre-coordinate or pre-gather response apparatuses that they're going to need, that the only way to get them there and get them to participate in it is to pretend it was part of a training exercise. So I'm just going to throw that out as one of the telltale signs that it might be a Gladio operation. So we're going to go over and I don't know, I'm old enough to remember this, but there there were the author calls it ghost trains, Madrid, London, and the template for tension. So also let me add that strategy of tension is another name for stay behind units, because the whole terror operations create the tension that they need to manipulate the people. So if you're doing searches, you can also search on strategy of tension and find Gladio information. So the date is March 11th. That means a great deal to people in Spain, but lacks the staying power when preserved for things like the Twin Towers or the London bombing in 2005 in the public imagination worldwide. Yet there were blasts that ripped 4 jam-packed commuter trains in Spain in the capital, Madrid, on March 11th, 2004. It was the most devastating act of deliberate carnage any European country had witnessed in modern time. The passengers that died on the way to work or school that morning numbered 192, another 1,100 were injured, and more than 150 were critically injured. So Spain, and just so that y'all, if y'all don't know it, Spain had went through horrific civil wars. They were under the fascist dictator Franco and went through um, their civil war happened from 1936 to 1939. And General Franco was a horrific fascist, mean in every sense of the word, terrorism. It was just an awful uh, period in Spain's history. So the elections fixed for the 14th of March of 2004, 3 days later, had all the signs of a close finish between the conservatives and the opposition socialists. Sounds familiar, right? Didn't that just happen in Spain where they tried to assassinate one of the guys? So that's what I'm telling you. Everything you're watching unfolding, if you learn and study Operation Gladio, you're going to be able to pick out what's going on. The explosions on the morning of the 11th immediately altered the political landscape. The government of Premier Jose Maria Zal Aznar immediately attached the blame to a group called ETA, the Basque Militant Front. They appeared to exploit this massive act of terrorism for political returns, the old stripe of the strategy of tension. The ruling Conservative Popular Party was roundly defeated by the opposition socialists following massive protests which erupted across the country. Aznar, who was a favorite of George H.W. Bush, pounded the message of a strong line against terrorism throughout his campaign as a way of countering huge opposition to Spanish troops that were currently serving in Iraq and Afghanistan as part of Bush's war on terror. His decision in the immediate aftermath of the bombings to blame the Basque, which he backed with personal calls to the editor of Spain's leading media organizations, the author calls them organs because they're propaganda, appeared as a lame attempt to wiggle out of an embarrassing mistake of his own manufacturing, namely to fight the campaign under the banner of fighting terrorism only to find it exploding in your face. The police were already making short work of the prime minister's alibi, although their initial conclusions raised more problems than solutions. For the first time in the so called war on terror, Islamicists and non-Muslim uniquely cooperated together. Two of the alleged perpetrators regularly grasped for the Guardia Civil, which is called the national, basically like the National Guard. And a third important figure actually was a policeman. The Basque were astonished, bewildered, and extremely angry. Who would then blow up the train, since it was soon obvious that the ETA militants were not the guilty party? The incoming socialist government immediately switched attention from rebel Basques to cells of jihadist sympathizers who supposedly had access to dynamite and other forms of explosives from contacts in the coal mines in the northern mountains. The theory held no more water than the discredited Basque claims. Diligent officers of the Madrid bombing squad pointed to signs of military grade explosives C3 and C4. And you'll remember when we were going over the um, Operation Gladio in Italy and all of the explosions that happened there during the same in the 80s and 90s all had access to the C4, which is a NATO compound that is supplied from the United States. Moreover, they accused their own colleagues of removing potentially incriminating evidence that comprised the official account. The explosives was not really let's see, man enough to account for the huge force of the blast. So they're saying even the explosives that they're saying that was supposedly the cause of it would not have done as much damage. The powerful shock waves of the supersonic proportions punching through heavy metal in the range of 10,000 to 25,000 feet per second. The ferocity of the blast also accounts for the massive numbers of casualties. Another significant feature in common with the bombs planted on the London transport network that will happen a year from now. They look very much alike. The famous decoy rucksack loaded with the coal mine type of explosives was the sole evidence pointed in that direction. Although the terminal wires had not been connected, the exhibit itself was dismissed as a fake. The police chief says, "What I am totally convinced of is that after search carried out by TDAX, there is not a single backpack containing an explosive device. The media circulated that one backpack contained screws and nails intended to serve as shrapnel. However, autopsies proved that none of the train bombing victims were struck by any metal." So even the fake backpack being planted, keep in mind, didn't we just see that at the RNC and DNC? The fake bombs that gets planted. So Carmen, the chief of the guard forensic officer, bluntly stated that there was no nails, no nuts, no screws. That's all fake. The image of a tightly bound cell of dedicated extremists looked decidedly unpromising when the indictments were handed down, portraying a heterogeneous group of Islamic New Agers, heroin traffickers, police informers, and ex Franco hardliners. This strange motley crew was alleged to be capable of military style precision planning, smuggling explosives, and access to NATO grade level explosives in the city center without arousing the smallest bit of suspicion. The guard already had some of the alleged perpetrators, Moroccans living in Spain, under surveillance, and the group was supposedly taken by surprise in a safe apartment. They obligingly blew themselves up. So Spain's second largest selling daily, which took a highly critical line of the official jihadist account, it would appear that Spain's 2004 elections was stolen by terrorists, all right, but the terrorist operation had been bought by the socialists to power to bring the socialists to power may have been an inside job. a coup perpetrated by some of the same authorities who are responsible for preventing terror. So, one of the freelance investigators says that they worked around the cracks in the official account to come up with the following hard conclusion. First and foremost, the ETA was not Al Qaeda. The bombs were ordered just 3 days before the elections, but the planning for the operation may have started up to a year earlier. There were two different sets of bombs, 10 loaded with high explosives, which wrought the carnage, and four that posed little threat at all, which are the ones that were probably carried on by the unsuspecting guinea pigs. Evidently, one highly sophisticated operation was superimposed on top of another more amateur looking one that had the Black Pawns, which is the name of an organization over there, devoted to exposing the lives of the machinery moving in the shadows, which squashed any prospect of an honest exposure from the very beginning. So, one editorial suggested that the skills necessary to pull off an operation could obviously be found in TEDx, TEDAX, a specialist bomb squad, which clearly knew far more about the sequence of events than any of the subsequent sweeps into the police dragnet. In short, a Gladio style deep state blueprint. Certainly, the show trial of the 28 accused conspirators failed to produce a shred of evidence of Al Qaeda involvement. 7 of the men walked free from the courtroom. None of the questions disputing the type of explosives used for the meticulous planning were aired. The court case was given off an international observer as a cover up and a farce. So, all of the international people are even saying that the trial was a joke. It It was a rehearsal for virtually the exact same script of the London bombings 15 months later. The Spanish courts elected to ignore all the basic rules of evidence in order to divert speculation in the interest of social calm. Remember, chaos control from the possibility of conspiracy organized at the heart of the government. When a judge handed down his judgment at the close of the record breaking 21-month chaotic trial, no one in Spain was any the wiser who was responsible for the most appalling episode of mass murder in Spain since their civil war in the 1930s. One minion, Jamal Zougham, was actually convicted of planting explosives in a rucksack. Others went down for long sentences amounting to thought crimes. Much of the evidence was entirely circumstantial. No effort was made to explain how a league of amateur conspirators with such diverse backgrounds gained the sophisticated ability to coordinate a complex attack. The so called emir of the entire enterprise, an Egyptian, left the courtroom a free man. Once it was proven that the guard fabricated incriminating phone messages that he purportedly made to other conspirators. This just reeks of stuff that we're seeing today everywhere. So they make up evidence to try to have a show um, trial. Isn't this what's going on today? To the number, you make up the crimes. You set people up, just like they did with the Whitner kidnapping. Just 2 days. Let me stop just because my mind's racing. I have said this repeatedly. They have to make up. They have spent years making up white supremacy as a crime because they need that narrative in order to come after us. And you see it happening right here. It's been happening. They've got lots of practice of this. It's an international conspiracy. It is not just here, it's everywhere. Just 2 days after the bombings, the Mangle coaches were broken up, melted down for scrap, a wanton destruction of crucial evidence. Does that sound familiar? Oklahoma bombing, September 11th. The issue of forensic traces drifted into reality once the trial got underway. Expert witnesses complained that police had very few samples and had lost the ones that they had completely. The court erupted in gowls of laughter when another expert suddenly recited a list of chemical compounds of which she said there were traces, a document never revealed in the previous 3 years. Her excuse was no one asked for it. And that evidence pointed to the NATO explosives and not the ones that they had been saying was in the coal mine. The prosecution insisted that the gang supplied themselves with material obtained from the coal mines. The central issue of the explosive grew mercury, mer, more, anyway, for some reason, I don't think, when an expert in identifying munitions testified that such extensive ripping of constructed steel coaches, blah, why can't I say that word? Was consistent with very high-powered explosives. The identical conflict between backpack bombs and high explosives that later arose in the London bombing. The judge complained the convoluted and conflicting evidence he heard from the bomb squad members was incomprehensible. Did you wanna say something, um, Cousin It?
Yeah, side note, I'm not sure if anybody's aware, you brought up the Whitewater. You brought up the Oklahoma bombing.
Correct.
The interesting part about that, it was only the bombing happened, I want to say it was a week before the Whitewater
You're
case
fading
going
in.
with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah,
I know, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
The building was blown up and all the Whitewater papers were destroyed a week before the trial. So that's why Whitewater never actually went any further.
And what we know is that all of these incidences are the terror incidences are done as warnings. They are done to hide evidence. And, um, we also have I just ran across in another book, a guy from, I'm not gonna say what country, a European country that was a trained Gladio operator that had embedded himself in Oklahoma. What's the name of the city that has all of the white supremacist, skinheads in it in Oklahoma? Do you remember, Cousin It? It's not very far from the Oklahoma, bombing, and this guy had befriended Timothy McVeigh. So there is a lot of circumstantial evidence that says that the entire Oklahoma bombing had all of the flavor of the, Gladio operation because they had foreigners embedded in the local area that after the fact and that guy was related to somebody, I'll look that up. He was related to somebody, a government official. He was the son, and they basically extricated him, um, under a diplomat immunity as soon as the bombing happened. And we saw that exact same thing in the JFK assassination, where they took an OAS member who was from France, that is a Gladio operator, and was an assassin, and they pick him up on the site of the actual um, assassination, escort him to the border in Mexico, and let him go. Never once questioned him. So I just want y'all to understand how important this subject is. Okay, so back to the story. There's a rucksack bombs, the ones that weren't really the bombs, the fake bombs. They were actually bombs, but they could not have done the damage that was done to the railroad cars. So the diversion bombs, I'll call it that. The rucksack bombs reached the train along with their handlers, appeared to have been dreamed up on the back of an envelope. The story went that a stolen Renault van packed with explosives and abandoned near one of the metro stations in the outskirts of Madrid, was left by the four men. Then they calmly strolled to a ticket office where they buy tickets. The hearsay evidence of the men with scarves on their heads, and they were Islamic terrorists because, by now we've gotten rid of the anti-communist, the communist threat, so we had to turn to Islamic terrorists, and we've went over that before too. So now all of the Gladio operations are against Islamic terrorists. But the clerk at the booking office insisted that the man that he sold the tickets to, number one, did not look like they were Arabs. They were absolutely not wearing headdresses, and they had no foreign accents. Okay, we lost Liza. Um, the clerk at the booking office, let's see. The truck contained a bomb due to explode as the train passed by in on the Madrid to Barcelona high-speed track. Investigated as a suspicious vehicle, it received a thorough sniffing by trained hounds who gave the all clear. All the more curious is that after it was towed by the police, the required signs of quote unquote substances miraculously appeared. So the dogs go and find no traces of bombs whatsoever. But once the police gets access to it, it now has contaminated quote unquote proof of explosives on it. How odd that so many of them, of the people that gets incriminated in this whole scenario, are actually the policemen involved. Two key suspects were guard informers, one by the name of Rafa Zalier, who lined the conspirators up with an explosive trafficker. In the 2 days before the attack, cell phone records show that he had called twice by his controllers. Did he admit a trifling conspiracy to terrorize the railway? The second one was Emilio Trashoras, who the alleged middleman squaring the deal. He had conversations with his police contact the day before the bombings and the day after. But more significantly, he spoke to his controllers immediately after he handed over the explosive. What else were these officers thinking about? As the coup de grace, the mobile phones intended to trigger the bombs were unlocked at a shop belonging to a policeman of Syrian origin whose duties it was to spy on potential Islamic dissidents. This is just like the FBI setups, where the patsies are the actors we see on the stage. The really important activity is taking place unseen in the wings. So they set these four guys up to cover up in this, like, uh, Abbott and Costello rutsack bombing garbage, where they have no evidence at all, to include the van that they have to plant the evidence on, all while actually creating a massive explosion that kills and injures over 1,000 people. But they're doing it. The government's doing it. The Gladio units are doing it. But they use this Abbott and Costello fake thing to pin the blame on. And they actually, in many of these cases, send these people to jail. And they never did anything wrong. A lot of them, as we find out after the fact, if they don't kill them, were under the impression that they were part of a training exercise, that they were actually helping the government do something. So much of this just, there's just one example after another example after another that we have been through, and I keep bringing it back to what's going on in Hamas today. How much of that is real, as far as um, are there any real terrorists, or are they government actors? Are they? And I'm not saying terrorism doesn't happen. Trust me, it happens. There are dead bodies, but who's behind it? Were the people that were involved, were they Gladio operators? Were they people that are assassins? There's entire armies of these people that have been trained killers since they were like 18 years old. They were trained on the island of Sardinia. They were trained on the islands off the coast of Portugal. They're trained at Fort Bragg. They're trained to be assassins. They're trained to be torture people for information. So I'm not saying what we're seeing isn't happening. I'm saying that the people involved in it aren't who we're being told. Because you take this situation right here, they kill and injure over 1,000 people in this event. It is 100% government orchestrated to affect an election. We know that now. And the people that they put up as their proxies, like just like what they're doing with the 9/11, just like what or the 1/6 people, just like what they did with the people that they tried to prosecute in the Whitmer government governor kidnapping. The whole thing was made up. It was the government that came up with the whole idea. And they get these people roped into this under false pretenses and then prosecute them, send them to prison. So they now have their white nationalist, white supremacy talking point. That's what this is about. So this story goes on and it talks about these young men had been sitting quietly for the best part for a month. Um, while the people from the city come out, they felt themselves were in no danger, um, that the whole cell phone setup was a psyop story, creating a Islamic um, slant to the whole story. Um, The police account stated that a large force of officers forced the door open and fired some shots before an explosion killed all of the occupants of the one room that they went to arrest some of these people, supposedly. But they end up killing a whole bunch of people. It was argued after the fact that those are the people that actually did the bombing. So the people that actually were hired, the government under the auspices of going to arrest them, throws a bomb in and kills them all. Okay? Dead bodies can't talk. So this is basically one of the scenarios. There's one more in this book, and then I will move on to the other book because there's two stories in there about different ones, different countries, and these kinds of things, just to show you the um, the literally the depth of depravity that we're dealing with, and the extent to which these people will go to achieve their end state, which is one world order and fascism as the mechanism to get us there. And I want to encourage everyone, because words matter, to start calling these people what they are. They are not communist. They're fascist. And in my way of thinking, there is a difference. Um, by calling them communist, you are associating them with a philosophy that in people's unconscious mind evokes Russia. Um, and that's not what this is about. If there's no indication that the Soviet Union ever wanted to be anything other than what they gave it at the end of World War II. They were tricked into invading Afghanistan. That's a whole long story, but the Chechens are Gladio, and that was provoked to create terrorism in order to control. Um, again, the I want to say it was Yugoslavia when they found out. May have been there's another country right in there. I want to say it was Yugoslavia. When they found out that how big of a weapons trafficking, no, it wasn't Yugoslavia. Anyway, There's one of the countries in Eastern Europe that basically the Soviet Union kicked out because they were so infested with weapons trafficking into Europe as part of Gladio that the Soviet Union did not wanna risk a confrontation with NATO and go to a nuclear war over this tiny little country, um, Bulgaria, that's who it was. Um, and they were part of the whole Gladio arms trafficking, opium trafficking Turkey, apparatus because they were taking the part of the, opium went overland through Bulgaria into, Europe, and Bulgaria became such a huge weapons trafficking, um, country that they kicked them out of the Soviet Union, um, kinda union, if you will, because they didn't wanna risk confrontation with the West. So, every single thing that we've been told about, uh, the aggression, of communism. That's why I refuse to use that word anymore. This is not about communism. These people said from the um, mid 1800s that they wanted a fascist styled new world order, and that's what they're going after. So let me go through here. One has to wonder how many wars would have actually happened without these instigators. So that's a great question, Bridget, because if you go back, I have traced this. So as soon as we got out of World War II, we almost immediately went into Korea for opium. Then we go into Vietnam for opium. Those those wars are instigated, and um, the CIA was present for both. Then, as soon as they set up all of the Gladio units as anti-communist, and in 1991, as soon as the communists fail and they're not around anymore, what happened? In 1991, oh my God, we went to Iraq. And what happened then? Well, there's opium growing in northern Iraq and in Turkey, and all of a sudden we're in Afghanistan and there's opium growing there. We have went and the war in Iraq in 1991 was instigated by the State Department telling Saddam Hussein, who by the way we created, that the he was free to go into Kuwait and reclaim the oil wells that he said he thought was his. And so we gave him permission to do it. Then we lied about him throwing babies out of incubators. Sound familiar? Hello. Because the person that did that was the ambassador, the Iraqi ambassador to the United States' daughter. That was all a media lie by the CIA. So you go back to that chart. It's Gladio, drugs, weapons, humans, money laundering, Gladio. It's a circle, and it just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And I don't think if you shut down the Gladio operations and you ever had the actual promise software that um, did what it originally was doing, which is spotting money laundering, if you had that, you shut down Gladio and you shut down the drugs, the world would live in peace for 1,000 years. And it can be done. We shut down the Corsican mafia. They supplied 80% of the heroin to the United States in 1972. We shut them down. We liquidated every one of their asses, right? And then what happened? We gave the entire market to the CIA, and within 4 years, we have doubled the amount of heroin coming into the United States, all under the auspices of the CIA. So we weren't interested in stopping it because we can stop it any minute. We showed that. We can wipe them all out. But that's not the name of the game. They don't want to do that. They want us dead They want us hooked on drugs so that we're easily manipulated, and that's the intent of the entire thing. One world government, we're the slaves. I'm not going peacefully. Um, so you're Lucy, I don't you're right. Um, they are definitely pitting the religions against each other. Um, we as people, as normal human beings, need to be able to see that. There's no better illustration of that than what we talked about with that Grand Mafia, Grand Mafia of Jerusalem. The Grand Mafia of Jerusalem was appointed by fascist British Roundtable people to go to pre-Israel Palestine. They paid him to agitate Arabs, Palestinians, and Jewish people, the new arrivals, the immigrants, to fight each other. He showed modified pictures of a mosque on fire, and got the Arabs, uh, Palestinians pissed off, and they go killed a bunch of Jews. Then he would go to the Jewish people and say that something happened over here, and get all the Jewish people inflamed, and they would go kill a bunch of Arabs. He was manipulating the terror, and the terror got so bad there that everybody finally um, went to the British authorities and said, "Please protect us." That's what they're going for. They want all of us, Christians, Muslim, Jews, to go to them to ask for protection. And they will kill as many of us as necessary to get us to do that. So, yes, we are purposely being pitted against each other. We have to choose not to play. Let's see what else we got. Um, wasn't Nord Stream blown after a training exercise? I don't know. You know what? You're right. You're absolutely right. Olive. Perfect, perfect, perfect. There was a NATO training exercise that was conducted right above Nord Stream. And I said, as soon as I started reading Gladio, that Nord Stream was a Gladio operation. And it was done by um, Ukraine. That was the first words out of my mouth. There was no way that was a Russian deal. Ukraine, the people, and let me just say this, when I say it was Ukraine, it's the people that are behind Ukraine, because Zelensky's a puppet. So, you know that BlackRock's already got the reconstruction, contract through the State Department to rebuild Ukraine, which means they're going to steal all the money and they're not gonna be rebuild shit, which is exactly what they did in Iraq, by the way, with the Biden brother. He got a full $4 billion contract in Iraq to build houses, and he had just gotten his contracting business the day before. So that's their idea of rebuilding. But there's there were um, gas and oil options that, of course, Russia had the lock on into Germany through Ukraine through those pipelines that were running over land. Well, basically, this undersea pipeline kind of cut Ukraine out of the uh, middle of that. And there were people making money on that they didn't want that other way to work. So that definitely was a terrorist event that was meant to affect the outcome of the military operation that is currently going on, and it was done in conjunction with a training exercise. Good catch. Very good catch. Um, yeah, the Knights Templar, you're right. They're a part of that, and that's why I wanna hold that for a completely different conversation because that's a very interesting, um, conversation to have. Okay. So, um, let's see. Let me get back over here. Um, so Liza is saying the USAID follows Samantha Powers. Yeah, USAID very much is a front company for the CIA. And Samantha Powers is very involved in all of this. I would argue at this point that USAID is the overt, while Gladio is funded covertly, USAID is the overt manipulation of the political apparatus, um, for everyone to see. And while you're seeing all of the overt manipulation through the USAID um, apparatus, you also have the covert terrorism part that's kind of hurtling people in that way. Um, Also, I read today, and I'm going to try to get that in a more presentable fashion. There were Gladio operators in Haiti as well in the early stages of their coup that they had. And we know how that all turned out. There's I I haven't been able to put all of the pieces together, but in the back of my mind, whether it's like we were talking earlier about the Oklahoma with the whitewater, there's kind of a theme that's running through all of this as it relates to Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, and when certain things happened. And I have some ideas percolating. I'm not ready to bring them out, but I did think that it was relevant today when I was reading about the different political aspects and the coups that have happened in Haiti to include the most recent one. Remember where our we actually heard that the CIA was part of the people that went in and basically took out the president of Haiti. So this stuff is getting more and more exposure. Okay. Have you intercepted any information on the No, I have not. Um, the closest I've came to that is there was a scientist that and I just read this today. I'm trying to put this together. Um, one of the leading scientists, like the most important one, that was 70 years ahead in technology from Germany in the aftermath of World War II, was taken to Argentina. He was set up on an island and created fission technology that, according to the Air Force, was 70 years ahead of where it should have been. And obviously, they're saying that now. He was interviewed repeatedly by Air Force people, um, and there was one lieutenant colonel who was an attaché to, like, Chile or Argentina, maybe Paraguay, but he was down there and he interviewed the guy, and he happened to be an engineer, and he made a lot of, notes about what the scientist was telling him, and when you fast forward decades later, there are people that now assess the technology that this guy had to be 70 years ahead of where everybody else was at that time, and it had to do with space and time. It had to do with a project called the Bell Project, and that supposedly was a very classified secret that they didn't want, and they gave all of these other scientists away to basically buy the ability to transport this particular scientist in that particular project to Argentina to the safety of a compound in a town that we did Google Earth, yesterday on it, and it looks like a Bavarian village, and it's in the middle of South America in Argentina. It's totally crazy. They have this huge, big hotel there like you would have to have if you're going to entertain a whole bunch of Nazi people that would come in from all over the world. They had big conventions. Um, One reporter went down there and interviewed somebody that said that actually started out as a plastic surgery hospital, and I mean, it's mammoth big. So, I don't know if that's true or not, that's just what somebody told the reporter. But you can Google Earth the Rose, and it looks like a Bavarian village. It's crazy. Um, so I will have that up on an upcoming podcast for us to discuss when I've got a little bit more of the pieces. Because just so that y'all know, when I read these books, I want to show you because it's crazy. It takes me a little bit of time to go through these books, but like, I will, I don't know if you can see, but I write all over my books, and I put notes in the side column to look something up. I put notes on there to buy this book or that book. Um, my daughter comes over and she'll pick up these books and she's like, "Mom, you folded the page. Mom, you wrote all over this book." Like you can see here, I just write notes because that's how I follow up and 'cause I wanna research stuff. I don't wanna just tell you something out of a book that I don't know is true. And so I like double and triple check everything to make sure that I have cross references, that I feel confident in being able to say it to you, that it's in fact true. And I'm not gonna show you my desk because it's a mess, but I've got about 15 books sitting on it. And I'm about half of them are ones that I have read, but they add to the flavor of the other stuff that we're presenting here. So I do have um, some surprises coming up of information that I'm digging into that I know y'all are going to enjoy. So we're going to talk next time about another one out of this book here on the Gladio. I have one more out of that book that I want to read. Then we're going to move over to Daniel um, Gansler's book because there's 2 in there that I wanna read to you. Um, and we will also I'm gonna dig a little deeper into the Military Order of Malta, and we're gonna start the show out with that, and then we'll go into the other story. So, with that, I'm going to, close up for today. Thank you for being here. Appreciate y'all, being here, and I will see you later.